Here, they're ready to turn it on. Use them a little stuff. Hi, you guys ready to start? Good, thank you. Okay.
Are we still audio only?
Yeah. Well, welcome, board members, Building and Fire Code Appeals board members. We don't have our normal chair with us today, so we're going to have James Langhorne sit in as our interim chair today to run today's meeting. And with that, I'll turn it over to our interim chair.
Thank you. Let's have a call to order right now. This meeting of the Building and Fire Code Board of Appeals is now open, April 7th, 2016. Start with a roll call. I'll start with Bonnie
Here.
Elliott.
Here.
Okay. Vincent Wood.
Here.
Ken McClellan.
Here.
And James Langhorne.
And then, Mr. Chair, we would just call the other names, and then when they don't respond, I'll make a note that they're not here.
Patrick Carroll.
He's not here.
Juliet Sponsel.
Not here.
Marcia Zellis.
Not here.
Are there any amendments to the agenda?
I don't have any.
Okay. Hearing none, I'll proceed to the next item. We have time for items that are not on the agenda. Public comment, limit to 2 minutes.
I think we have one. You can give it to Mr. Langhorne here.
Thanks, sir. I have a request to speak from Will Railing. And he represents I'm sorry, you must be a doctor. What's your writing look like?
I'm here on behalf of a small organization that you've never heard of, Accessible
Can you
Santa
turn it
Barbara.
on, please?
I think it should be on
You
now.
just need to get a little closer to it. There you
Okay. We've started a small organization, Accessible Santa Barbara, essentially an advocacy group, not a service group. So we're very small. But we intend to file some appeals and pursue some advocacy work, basically, before your board. In fact, we just filed an appeal. And we filed one once before, which Mr. Stuffler correctly pointed out to us was premature on the fact situation. So before I forget, I was at City Hall after your last meeting, and I witnessed the historic event of Mr. Wood being sworn in for his new term, making him the longest serving member of any board in the city. I believe that's correct.
Who, me?
Yes.
How'd that happen?
Perhaps in history, so congratulations on that. This is not on the agenda. The matter that you heard the last time, I'm hoping, and let's leave it at that there might be some, follow-up. I know it's not on the agenda today, so presumably you're probably curious yourselves. And secondly, we did file an appeal today, which Mr. Stuffler will, handle totally appropriately as always. But I'm just going to give Mr. Stuffler a copy now because there might be questions that he would want to ask me. But again, it's not on the agenda for today. So thank you very much. That's it. Thank you. Appreciate your service on the board.
Thank you.
We had one more comment.
I'm going to do another bad job of pronouncing this. Next speaker would be a Jim Marstoff.
I'm sorry, I don't write very much.
Marston?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to comment on this appeal.
Jim, come on up there.
I We're going to comment on this appeal, not,
Oh,
not
okay.
a general one.
We'll hold that then till.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, any more public comment? All right, we'll move on to a hardship ratification for 3771 State Street, which will require a board decision. Is there a staff presentation?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Andrew Stuffler, for the record, the building official for the city. This is a hardship ratification for access compliance that came through our building and safety division, as they all do, and we evaluated the hardship, and I'll let my memorandum and staff report kind of stand. It has the facts in it, but I did take some pictures today of the site so that I know the board has mentioned they like pictures, kind of to help them get a feel for what's going on, what we're really talking about. So let me get it up here on the wall. So this is it's distorted. It's a panoramic kind of picture, but standing at the back of this building at 3771 State Street. Large, not large lot at all. It's actually very narrow and kind of long, but across the back it's paved, and then on one almost kind of corner is the trash enclosure structure, and the issue that they're seeking hardship approval on is the accessible route of travel from the back of the building to the trash enclosure area. We typically, if it was not cost prohibitive and it was within a reasonable cost, we would require them to have a ramp or some means to get an accessible path to the trash enclosure. So, and I've documented this in the staff report, the different costs. It's significantly, they can meet their obligation of 20%. Well, it's not really obligation. They're just over a threshold. So they really have to look at improving the entire path of travel. But the difference in cost between what they are going to do and what total compliance, relocating some of these utilities in the back and putting the ramp in, is disproportionate to the amount of money that they're spending on the project. So let me show you kind of, it looks sort of innocuous until you get into it a little closer. At this, so at the back here, you go up these stairs, there's a gate, and then there's a deck area in the back, and it's shown on the plans in the staff report. The applicant provided it. It's on the first plan that you'll see in the staff report. There's a site plan, and if you look at the back of that building, you'll see there's an area where there are two doors in series. That door that you see there is the last door before you go down the stairs. If you go up these stairs and look over here behind this wall, you will see one huge electrical service. This is about 6 foot tall by, 5 feet wide or so. And within it is some pretty serious electrical gear. So moving this around and dealing with the conduits that come up and feed this add to the cost of what would ordinarily be kind of a simple ramp installation. And that's what the applicant has documented in their costs for installing the ramp at the back of this building. So I provide that just so you can kind of get an opportunity to sort of look and see. I took these pictures today at lunch, so they're pretty fresh. And with that, I'll leave my staff report to stand, and then the applicant is here. If they want to say something, they can. Yeah, I'd encourage you to come up. We're not like super formal, so if you want to sit up here, you can, and the board may have questions for you. Did you
question?
Sure.
Is this similar to the trash situation we had on State Street about 4 months ago, where he didn't want to make a ramp and it was out the back? I think it was between Canyon Perdido and Correa Street there.
Yeah, that was one of Colonel Androlaitis' projects where they had a small, a jewelry store or something like that, and in the back they had a change in elevation down to the trash enclosure, and it had stairs, and they needed to put a ramp in. It's very similar, only this has the utilities associated with it that add to the complexity of the cost of construction.
There was not a utility problem with that one we're just talking about on State Street.
Yeah, I don't recall that being
No,
part of that.
Okay. And I think we approved it.
We did.
Yeah.
The board did.
All right. So, are you prepared to present anything for the?
I'm not necessarily. I'm here if I could field any questions if anyone has any. Otherwise, I'm to the building officials to reiterate. I stand by the report and the hardship as it's written. Maybe one other thing in addition to the utilities, the grease interceptor behind the wall to the left is also at that raised level as well, the existing grease interceptor. So there's another huge chunk of utility, non-associated electrical gear that's in that as well, which we've also identified in the hardship.
Thank you. Mr. Stuffler, I was hoping that if we did have didn't have a lot of conversation about all of this, that before we move on this, that we could talk about the intent of the code as it addresses this issue. Years ago, I was somewhat intimate with it. I don't presume to think that because I was then that I am now. But as a fire marshal, I was quite anxious that as I got into it and the intent of the code, there was a hierarchy of needs, or priorities as they were listed, and at the bottom was fire. And what made that interesting is that things like accessible bathroom or accessible entrance or a telephone that could be used were at a higher priority. And then it dawned on me, if people can't get into these buildings, why are they going to worry about how they get out? So it's real important that we develop some perspective as we hear these, as we continue to hear these, as to how those priorities have shaken out and what it is we need to address and what we don't, because I worry about an uneven approach to some of this. Just as I think Vince was saying, didn't we see something like this before? So I'm hoping that our understanding will grow and our appreciation of what we're trying to accomplish here will grow to a point where it's credible to all.
Okay. Yeah, and we do have public comment also that we can take on this to get additional perspectives. So I know we had one, Mr. Marston had his public comment carded, and there may be another one coming, it looks like. So feel free to invite them up.
I have a question. Is this that old Taco Bell building?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Who is the tenant now, and what's it being used for?
It's Dunkin' Donuts.
Dunkin' Donuts.
So it's a food service.
Yeah, it's a conversion from, and I might add too, with respect to the accessibility of the previous Taco Bell, we've essentially gutted the entire interior of the building and put in fully compliant accessible restrooms. We're also doing work on the path travel to the public way and the accessible parking stalls as well on the existing property. So the only thing that became an infeasible thing was this path of travel to the trash enclosure from the rear door. We even explored options, and the health departments shut us down, of trying to circumvent stuff through the front door from the kitchen, but they didn't want trash going through the dining room. So we also looked at that as a possibility too. So with that being the case, here we are filing the hardship.
Those are good things to have on the record. Thank you.
So I just want a point of order real quick, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Marston, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, just had a few things.
Yeah, okay. And then Bonnie, we can pick up the.
Okay.
I don't want to lose the public comment before we deliberate because it.
Jim Marston here. I just had one of my questions answered because I was wondering if you could just go out the front, which I'm sure is accessible, but it's health department problem there, right? And I do understand this is quite a big move to move all this stuff, but I just want to beg that one thing that's needed in the city is consistency, and so sometimes we allow these, sometimes we don't. I realize this has a very high price to it, so I'm not going to try to sway either way. I just hope that we don't start getting these things for every place because it's going to cost them a little bit too much. And I want to point out something here in the letter. It says that their way to solve this problem is to give it to somebody else. Now, the ADA does not allow for human interference to circumnavigate the law, such as if you had a curb that a wheelchair couldn't go up, you can't say, oh, we'll have 2 people out there to pick up the wheelchair. That is not a reasonable accommodation. One of the major accommodations that is allowed is what you see today, an interpreter for the deaf. That's a person helping a person accommodate. I'm visually impaired. If I need accommodation, I can request large print or braille. Okay, not a person to tell me what it says. So, just want to make sure that maybe we don't want to have these kinds of fixes here, where you just say, well, we'll have somebody do that for the person in the wheelchair. So, I realize it's a high cost. I'm curious, maybe the cast person can tell me this. $10,000 for the tactile warnings. That's like $300 a foot. Is that really an accurate number?
I mean, you're welcome to ask questions of staff, but our staff doesn't do construction estimating, so
Okay.
I mean, we would be guessing kind of.
Okay.
But
Well, I just want to say I hope we can be consistent in the majority of cases. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Did we have one other?
Any more public comment?
I'm checking your handwriting this time. That's much better. Mr. Relling.
Yeah, so since I mentioned before that we had started an organization, a lot of times when that happens, it's someone with an axe to grind, an agenda, a group of people, that feel things aren't being done well. And I just wanted to start by saying that we think Mr. Selfer's been doing a great job with this board and otherwise in accessibility. It doesn't mean we won't sometimes be suggesting some changes, but we don't start from the position of being critics. And this is a good example of that because he, with your assistance, has to manage this process of deciding these path of travel hardship waivers. And it's a bit of a balancing act between the desire to have a place of employment be accessible for all of the employees versus the potential for having a really unreasonable cost. And so I think that on most of these, the right note has been struck on that question. I share Dr. Marston's concern about the applicant's letter stating that in order to achieve equivalent facilitation, we'll have a process, I'll read that sentence, maintain a process in which any disabled employee will take the trash to the rear kitchen door and hand off the bag to another employee who would then carry the trash to the enclosure at the southeast corner of the site. So I'll just point out for future cases, I guess, that as well, that your decisions create hard construction results, which are lasting. And I'm very concerned that sort of a soft promise to do things in a certain way may not be enforceable. So I have some concerns about that. And in the big picture, the last thing I'd like to say is sometimes some of these requirements can seem very nitpicky or inefficient, but what happens when you have a inaccessible aspect of a place of employment that can't easily be remedied in the future is that the tenant in the future has a ready-made excuse not to hire somebody who's disabled. I think it might be hard to imagine most disabled people being able to work at a place like Dunkin' Donuts where there's really not a lot of room and things are everywhere. But there are a lot of these path of travels to trash enclosures, for example. There are very much disabled employees who fulfill those functions. The city has a contract with Work Inc. To clean the restrooms around the beach, and part of that is taking out. That's an organization to help disabled people be employed. So So rather than say you shouldn't approve this one, I guess I just like to sort of point out these factors and kind of support the that side of the equation in your thinking to be mindful that these requirements about what's physically going to be there will impact employment decisions in the future. So that's really what I wanted to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more public comment? Hearing none. Bonnie, it's your turn.
Well, first I want to say you didn't cover the ex parte thing, but I both Will and Jim are friends of mine, but I'm not involved in that with Access Santa Barbara at all or anything like that. So I just wanted to clarify all that stuff. But that was my concern also is when people come to us, businesses come to us wanting an exemption because of a trash enclosure or whatever. Is that an excuse to not hire people with disabilities later on? Dunkin' Donuts is a chain, and the money issue is I always question the amounts written down. I don't know how to judge if they're true or not. Are they inflated? If they're deflated, or what's going on? I just want you guys to think about that. I'll just give that some thought. I realize you've got 4 or 5 steps to deal with. The ramp would be a bit much, I think. And I didn't know about all the electrical stuff. I did go down there to the address and look at it in the building. Yeah, it's definitely gutted. But I didn't go around back. I was a little bit intimidated by all the equipment around and stuff, so I didn't go back there. But I just wish there was another way of putting a ramp in, but I don't see it. So thank you. I think that's my comment for now.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to just...
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to respond to one of the comments. And so this is something the board needs to be aware of, right, is that when the board makes a decision or staff comes to you asking for support of a decision, like this ratification, we do weigh the long-term building and usability or kind of discriminatory impacts of this. So on one side, when we approve this, Dunkin' Donuts has gone on record that they're going to manage this operationally, right, so that there's non-discrimination amongst their employees and equal opportunity. But Dunkin' Donuts can come and go, and someone else can move in, and so that is a bit of a mystery, right? I mean, we'd like to think everybody's as good as that, and they're going to make a commitment to do it, but there's no legal document or means to hold them accountable for that. So that's a wild card. There's another piece though that kind of on the other side of that coin, and my staff can correct me if I get this wrong, but the amount of construction valuation that's being done, I think in this case, it is $183,000, right? 500? Is that what we had, Christy? No, I'm looking at the report. It says that the project is estimated to cost $183,500. And the threshold is $150,244 for when you have to look at complete compliance, as opposed if you're under $150,244, you can just do 20% and then you're good. So in this case, there's a $33,000 difference. That does go on the books as $33,000 worth of construction that really kind of hasn't been included in a 20% calculation. So the next time they come in, we're gonna look, the building owner comes in for improvements, we're gonna say, you already got $33,000 worth of kind of access compliance valuation that you need to add into whatever your next project is, right? Because I think I remember learning that that's cumulative, the amount that's over. I'm looking at my staff for a nod, hopefully. 20% of the 150 or 20% of the, yeah. But so I'm looking at the difference between the $150,000 threshold and the $183,000 estimated construction value. So I'm saying that's $33,000 over the threshold.
If there's any money that 20% should,
Elizabeth, you want to come up and?
Right. If a project, let's just say that their 20% should have been 100,000, and they only spent 20,000. On a future project, we could go back and look at the documentation and say, you still have 80,000 that you should spend towards accessibility
I have
on
it
some
backwards.
future project.
Okay.
It is capped to a 3-year period, so we only get to go back 3 years. So if this doesn't have any renovations for the next 10 years, then we don't get to capture that.
So it gets taken into account in the next round of reviews, so it's not lost and washed away.
It is if they wait long enough.
Yes, if they wait more than 3 years, then it will. But the regulations change every 3 years, so I think that's I'm guessing, but I'm anticipating that that's probably why they do that. But maybe Elizabeth knows for sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
I said, Andrew was saying it doesn't get washed away, but it does after 3 years.
Right. So we keep we revisit the form and we look at what is being proposed, and again, depending on if it's below the threshold, they're capped to a maximum of 20%. That's all they're required to spend. If they're over the threshold, then in theory they could be made to make the entire project compliant, but the intent of the law wasn't to make someone go broke trying to completely make a project accessible. So if a project budget is $300,000 and it's going to cost $500,000 to make it completely accessible, then that's disproportionate, and the building official can weigh in and say, that's not what the law intended.
So that begs the question: what threshold does become unreasonable?
So just so you know what goes through my head when I look at these, I look at the difference between the threshold amount that the state set, $150,244, changes every year. They adjust it, so it usually goes up. And then I compare it to the actual project valuation, so $183,000. So and then I look at the percentage difference. So, what is the $33,000 difference relative to the total construction cost? And then I look at what do they need to spend in order to be 100% compliance, and are we close? Are we talking about they're 20% over the 150,000, and it's going to cost them 25% to be totally compliant? Well, maybe that's proportionate. But when it gets to be a factor of 2 or 3, then I'll say, that seems like it's disproportionate. Like we're requiring them to invest beyond how much further they've gone beyond the construction minimum valuation, if that makes sense. So in this case, I looked at 33,000. I think I put the percentages in here. It's in that first paragraph. 20% of the project cost is $36,700. The applicant's already committed to spending over that amount, $41,500 in improvements. They are $33,000 over the threshold, but they need to do $56,000 worth of work to be fully compliant. So that's where I'm looking to see, are they close? Is it reasonable or not? And I look at percentages and technical feasibility and things like that. In this case, if there were no utilities in the back, I would say I don't support it, because you can easily rearrange the exterior walls, and get your ramp in. But with grease interceptor and the utilities, it's going to be a lot more work than just putting in a ramp. It's going to be rerouting utilities.
Question, maybe I'm not seeing it right, but you come out the door and you're on a threshold of some type. What does it come out, 3 feet or 4 feet?
Yeah, if you look at the plan in the packet, the first drawing in the packet, there's the site plan there, and you'll be able to see the little area at the back of the store. I don't know if they put a dimension on it, but it looks like it's about, it felt like it's about 5 feet or so. 6, yeah.
Why couldn't you just come off the side of that?
Because there's electrical stuff there.
Huh?
There's
No, the electrical stuff's behind the wall, isn't it?
The electrical stuff is behind the wall, but the conduits, the gas service is on the left side on the back. The electrical service is on the right side on the back, and the grease interceptor and waste line is on the left side on the back. So when they start digging...
Bushes are.
No, they're up on the higher level, but the conduits and everything are down below. So the mystery is, when they start digging to put in their foundations for their ramps, are they going to be rerouting electrical conduit?
Okay, I withdraw that then.
Yeah. No, we had the same questions. In fact, we were just talking about it before the meeting. What options do we have?
Because I didn't see any options for a ramp. You know, what would it look like and all that. So.
Yeah, come on up.
I can probably clarify a few things to the point of the ramp. I mean, even in that distance between the back wall the back wall of the building to that wall that's enclosing that little yard, if you will, that's about 2 feet plus or minus higher than the asphalt.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at minimum at 1 and 12. We're looking at 24 foot of ramp plus landings. You know, probably the switchback ramp. To start with, and that if it was just as simple as that, but to your point with regards to the utilities, all the underground secondaries coming into that electrical gear are coming from underground. The grease interceptor, the sewer on the left side of that yard, and that was kind of we were trying to find room for the ramp anywhere else. Again, looking even out the front of the building, coming down the side, then the health department shut down that. But with respect I was going to mention with respect to the percentages, the prices we have in here are pretty accurate with respect to costs for what the work to redo all that and, you know, eliminate walls and so forth. But that's 50-something thousand beyond the 40 that we're spending, so that in accessibility would be almost near $100,000 on a let's call it $200,000 project even. So that's what that disparity to further that analysis comes in. But yeah, it's sewer, gas, and electrical are all back there on that platform inside of that yard to maybe make and I didn't write this letter from my client, so I do apologize and maybe it could have been written a little better than it was with regards to a handoff. What the intention and what we had discussed was in that yard, the trash can be easily deposited by anyone that cannot obviously traverse the steps and left in that yard temporarily until it can then be moved to the trash enclosure across the site. So it's not necessarily passing the baton per se, but I mean the trash can be, you know, gotten out of the back of the house and left there.
And the health department's okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be for any great length of time, but it would be bag trash, and then it can be traversed back to the enclosure. So those are just a couple of things I thought I'd add. I don't know if there's any other questions with regards to that.
Okay.
My only concern again is just I just hope you're not using this as a deterrent to hire somebody with a disability.
Not at all.
Because they can't take it out the trash. Okay.
No, I could speak for my clients on that. That's not because and again they're really they were the first ones that honestly before I even got out there when I did the initial survey of the lot they were the first ones that said, hey, look at the parking stall. I'm not sure it's striped correctly. You need to make sure that's right. So they were pretty open to it. So when I got out there and doing our initial measurements, etc. So, and if there's anything from them that would need to be further on the record, again, that couldn't go necessarily past the Dunkin' Donuts, I'm sure they'd be happy to oblige. So.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the board?
Not for me, no. Nope.
Okay. Well, we need a motion to ratify this hardship.
I'll make a motion to ratify the hardship.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Second. All four? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. This motion carries. Do we need any further discussion on this, or have we covered this to our satisfaction? Do we all?
I'd like to have more of I guess more training or something or more information just as our group, not to have we need more information on what options we have because I don't like. And to be honest, I'm a little embarrassed not to be able to think of another kind of ramp for them to build. I don't know enough about different kinds of ramps, and I apologize for that. but I think there needs to be other options, and I'd like to discuss that with the board further at some point. For just general businesses in general, because there's going to be other stuff come up.
So, Mr. Chair, just to make sure I understand Bonnie's request, is it that the board would like to have some training on the technical aspects of accessibility relative to ramps, or on how the 20% thresholds evaluation that staff makes works, what metrics we use, or both, or I need a little more scope so I know we get the right thing to you.
Sure. I was just thinking about things like the restrooms. Are there, if for emergency service reasons, if there's a fire, the alarm's going to go off, but is there a light in the bathroom that flashes? Is there, there's going to be an audio alarm, but if someone goes in and there's deaf, they're not going to know.
So
things like that in a restaurant, just all of the accessible stuff that I know that's all followed right now with ADA, but I know that last I checked there was no audio stuff going on in the restrooms, things like that. If there was an alarm.
So, Mr. Chair, according to on this project or in general?
In general.
Okay. So because that extended training is pretty onerous. That's kind of with the training that we give our plans examiners. So you can spend many hours.
Mm-hmm.
But we could touch on topics. I mean, if the board desires to have some general accessibility technical training, and we have good expertise on the board when it comes to the alarm systems and indicators, I'm sure James has looked at them as a fire marshal and his staff, and knows the ins and outs of the notification requirements for accessible notification. So we can put things like that together, or we can bring you the fundamentals of ramp design so you can understand that, or we can bring you the not the hardship, but the 20%, the thresholds, the kind of the dollars and cents parts evaluation and the theories that go with that, if that's what you desire.
Well, I don't do percentages and things like that very well. I'm sorry. I don't think in those terms. So I just look at the picture, see what it looks like, and see what's those kinds of things. But so that's okay. Don't worry about that. But I do have one other question. I know Dunkin' Donuts. I guess you guys have menus, although you sell donuts, so there's not many menus. There's just a list of things. But do you have anything in Braille?
I'd have to check in on that with operations, but I'm sure that can be probably.
Okay.
So the response for the record, because it didn't come up on the audio, is that the representative from Dunkin' Donuts said that they would look into that and see what they have in their operations plan for servicing people who are blind or have visual impairments.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't ask about that sooner. I meant to.
So I'm curious, where is that set up? Is that near the Whole Foods? Is that the location? Is that by Whole Foods out there?
Yeah, this site is in front of a little bit west.
The old Taco Bell there on
the old Taco Bell building.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
On State Street, front's right on State.
So, and that's where it is.
Yeah, this door is on the back of it. This is the back door to that building.
I've never seen that view. I guess it just looks strange.
Yeah.
Right now, there's a green fence in front of it, but it's there.
Oh, that's why I haven't seen it. Okay.
Thank you for that. I think Bonnie's question was similar to my previous comments. We're trying to grow our understanding. We're trying to do those things, and between the applicant and what he talked about in terms of cost, what you've talked about in terms of how you considered it, I feel that we've had some of that already today, Bonnie. In response to your inquiry about strobes and that sort of notification in bathrooms, after I retired the first time, I started doing work with the military, and nobody uses a finer sieve than they do on their criteria. And it really is exhausting to work with them. But I got called and plan check because I had put strobes and I put all these devices into a bathroom. and they required me to take them out. I thought if anybody needed encouragement, it'd be somebody in a bathroom, It's what's happened is there's a whole priority, a scheme of priorities that have to be winnowed out before we sometimes get to things like a trash enclosure and its access. And I think that's the spirit of the law. We bring this thing to a point, and it's going to shift, it's going to form as realities, predicate. I can remember doing design work back in the early 80s when accessibility issues first came in, and they were very crude, and they really didn't have the kind of price tags on them then, but we've been suffering with trying to come to a better understanding of how to make these things happen for, 35 years now?
I just want to add something. When you asked the question about what the requirements were, currently, if you were to build a brand new trash enclosure, it's required to be on an accessible route. It's considered a new building, and there's no out. It's supposed to be on an accessible route because it's considered an employee work area. That doesn't mean that someone can't petition the building official, again, based on, if it's going to cost you $500,000 and you were spending only $300,000, because the intent isn't to bankrupt someone. But again, the general rule, if it's a brand new trash enclosure, the law requires you to provide access to it. What you have here is an existing trash enclosure, and because they exceeded the threshold, then they start to look at all the path of travel obligations, and again, they presented their case that it's disproportionate to what they're spending. So there is a difference between an existing trash enclosure and something that's brand new.
Thank you. All right, any further discussion from this board?
Mr. Chair, I just want to note on item 6 here that it is the open semi-annual recruitment period for our boards and commissions. So if you know someone who wants to participate on this board, encourage them to fill out an application and file it with the city clerk. That's just item 6 on here. I don't know if it was on. Did we miss it on yours? Hopefully we didn't.
No, Vince
Okay.
got a hold of my papers.
Oh, okay. So also, during the semi-annual recruitment periods that we have for our boards and commissions, if you're looking to get onto a different board and you want to step off of this board, it's a good time to make us aware of that so that we know we have an opening. A lot of our boards have limited positions. This is a very unique board. It has no limit on the number of board members. The only limit is on how many people we invite to a hearing. So the board members that we invite. It's very unusual. We don't have that in any other board in the city. And I'm not sure how much longer we'll have that because that may change when we adopt our new codes, but that's the way it's structured right now. So just wanted to make everybody aware of that.
I was going to ask, why is it structured like that?
You know what? That's a good question. We'd have to ask some of the older building officials how that got put in there. So, and then I did include, just as an announcement, I did include, and I don't have a copy here, but you guys have a copy of some training.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, James. So this is a training that's put on by our city clerk for all people who are members of boards or commissions of the city. And I would encourage you to attend this. It's just the annual advisory group workshop, and they talk about all sorts of things, ethics and Brown Act and all sorts of things. So it's good refresher for you if you're interested. Okay, and that's it for me.
Nothing to add? I'd like to add that I'm disappointed we didn't get a box of donuts.
I was going to say, keep posted for the grand opening, I'm sure. And I apologize, I have operational issues with the menu. I'm only the architect, so I have to defer to the client, the operator. So I'll check in on the menus and stuff. So yeah, I'm sure there'll be more than plenty.
I'll second that complaint.
All right, so I think we're at a point where I can ask for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I will second the motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you, board. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Turn off the switch.
You know, I'm so glad that Bonnie and Ken are.